My name is Ryan, and this happened when I was in 8th grade. Even now, almost 10 years later, I still think about that day whenever I hear a school lockdown alarm. At the time, I attended a public middle school in a small town. Nothing exciting ever happened there. Most days were completely predictable. The biggest things students worried about were tests, homework, and getting detention. That's why nobody took the lockdown seriously at first. It happened on a Thursday morning during second period. I remember because we had a math quiz that day, and I was more nervous about that than anything else. About 20 minutes into class, the intercom suddenly came on. At first, there was only static. Then the principal's voice came through. "Teachers, initiate lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill." The room instantly went silent. Our teacher stopped talking in the middle of a sentence and looked toward the speaker mounted near the ceiling. Nobody moved. Then she repeated the announcement under her breath. "This is not a drill." That was when I felt my stomach drop. She rushed to lock the classroom door and turned off the lights. The blinds were closed, and we were told to move to the back corner of the room where nobody could see us through the small window in the door. Most of us had participated in lockdown drills before, but this felt different. Our teacher looked genuinely scared. We all squeezed together in the corner. Nobody talked. Nobody laughed. Nobody checked their phones. The entire room was completely silent. For the first few minutes, all we could hear was the humming of the air conditioner. Then even that stopped. The school had apparently shut off part of the power. The silence became almost unbearable. I remember hearing my own heartbeat. About 10 minutes later, footsteps echoed somewhere down the hallway. At first they sounded distant. Then they got closer. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Every student in that room heard them. The footsteps stopped directly outside our classroom. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Then a man's voice came from the hallway. "Police department." The voice sounded strange, not threatening, not angry, just calm. Too calm. "Open the door." Several students immediately looked toward our teacher. One girl whispered, "It's the police." But our teacher didn't move. The voice came again. "Open the door. We need to clear the room." I remember thinking that something felt wrong. If it really was a police officer, why wasn't he using a radio? Why was he alone? Why wasn't there any other noise in the hallway? The man knocked 3 times, slowly. Then he spoke again. "Open the door." Our teacher shook her head. She whispered so quietly that I almost didn't hear her. "Real officers have keys." Nobody said another word. The hallway became silent again. For a moment I thought he had left. Then the doorknob moved. Once, twice, 3 times. Someone behind me started crying. The man stopped trying the handle. Then he began knocking harder. Not pounding, not kicking, just knocking. Over and over, as if he knew we were all listening. I can't explain why, but that was somehow worse. The entire time he kept repeating the same sentence. "Open the door." I remember looking at the small window in the classroom door. From where I was sitting, I couldn't see the hallway, but I could see a shadow moving across the glass. Whoever was out there was standing inches from us. Finally, after what felt like forever, the footsteps returned, slowly moving away. Eventually, they disappeared completely. Nobody moved for nearly 20 minutes afterward. Then police officers actually arrived. This time we could hear multiple voices, radios, commands. The sounds were completely different. When they entered our classroom, the first thing one of the officers said was, "Everyone is safe." I have never felt relief like that in my life. The school was evacuated shortly afterward. Students were released to their parents, and rumors immediately started spreading. Some people claimed there had been a weapon. Others said someone had escaped from a nearby hospital. Nobody seemed to know the truth. My parents and I assumed that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, detectives visited our house. I still remember opening the front door and seeing them standing there. My mom looked confused. The detectives asked if they could speak with us privately. We sat at our kitchen table while they explained what had happened. A man had been arrested several counties away after someone reported suspicious behavior near another school. His vehicle was searched. Inside, investigators found photographs, maps, handwritten notes, schedules. Most of the material was related to schools, including mine. The detective told us they were still trying to understand his intentions. Then he placed a large envelope on the table. My mother looked nervous. So did the detective. He opened the envelope and pulled out several photographs. The first few showed our school parking lot. Another showed the football field. Another showed the student pickup area. Then he placed one final photograph face up on the table. For a second, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was me. The picture had been taken from across the street from my house. I was standing near the mailbox at the end of our driveway. The photograph wasn't recent. It had probably been taken weeks before the lockdown. What terrified me wasn't the picture itself. It was the red circle drawn around my face. Nobody spoke. The detective eventually explained that investigators had found multiple photographs of different students. Mine happened to be one of them. They couldn't determine why certain students had been selected. They didn't know whether he had intended to contact us, follow us, or something worse. The man refused to cooperate during questioning. As far as I know, he never explained anything. The police eventually told us there was no reason to believe I had been specifically targeted. But that didn't make me feel any better. For months afterward, I checked every window in the house before going to bed. I avoided walking home alone. Every unfamiliar vehicle made me nervous. Even now, whenever somebody knocks on my door unexpectedly, I think about that classroom. I think about the shadow behind the glass. I think about that calm voice asking us to open the door. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if our teacher had believed him. My name is Ethan, and this happened during my junior year of high school. I've never been able to forget it. Even now, years later, I still think about that afternoon whenever I hear a classroom door slam shut. It was a Friday during the last period of the day. Everyone was exhausted and counting down the minutes until the weekend. Our teacher was reviewing material for an upcoming test, but hardly anyone was paying attention. A few students were scrolling through their phones under their desks. Others were talking quietly. Then we heard shouting somewhere in the hallway. At first, nobody thought much of it. Schools are noisy places. But then the shouting got louder and angrier. Our teacher stopped talking and looked toward the classroom door. A second later, someone ran past our room, then another person, then another. The hallway suddenly erupted with chaos. Students were screaming, doors were slamming. I remember looking at my friend and asking what was going on. Before he could answer, our teacher rushed to the door and looked through the small window. The expression on his face changed instantly. He locked the door, turned off the lights, and told everyone to get down. Nobody argued. The fear in his voice was enough. We moved into the corner of the room furthest from the door. Some students were crying before we even knew what was happening. The school intercom remained silent. No announcements, no instructions, nothing. Just confusion. For the next few minutes, we sat in complete darkness. Then we heard footsteps. Slow footsteps. Walking down the hallway. The sound seemed deliberate, like whoever it was wasn't in a hurry. The footsteps stopped directly outside our classroom. The doorknob moved. Once. Twice. Then harder. Several students gasped. The handle rattled violently. Then everything stopped. For a moment I thought whoever was outside had left. Then came 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The person knocked again, this time harder. Then a voice came through the door. "Open up!" A chill ran through my entire body. The voice sounded young, maybe 18 or 19, not much older than us. Nobody answered. Then came a loud crash against the door. The entire room jumped. Another crash followed, and another. One of the girls near me started crying uncontrollably. I honestly thought we were about to watch the door come off its hinges. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. The hallway fell silent. No footsteps, no talking, nothing. Almost 2 minutes passed. Then the classroom door swung open. The room exploded into panic. Some students screamed, others ducked under desks. A few simply froze. Standing in the doorway was a young man wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. In his hands was what looked exactly like a rifle. I felt my stomach drop. I genuinely believed I was about to die. The man slowly stepped into the classroom, looking around at all of us, taking his time, watching our reactions. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Then he smiled. A strange smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. He raised the rifle. Several students screamed. One girl collapsed to the floor. Our teacher stepped in front of us. I still remember that. He actually put himself between us and the gun. Then the man laughed. A loud, ugly laugh. "Relax," he said. "It's fake." Nobody knew what to think. The weapon looked real, completely real. Then he tossed it onto the floor. The rifle landed with a hollow plastic sound. An airsoft gun. An incredibly realistic one. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The entire room was still trapped between terror and disbelief. Then our teacher started yelling at him. The man just stood there smiling, as if the whole thing had been entertaining. Moments later, police officers rushed into the room. The smile vanished from his face. They tackled him to the ground and placed him in handcuffs. The nightmare was over. Or at least that's what we thought. The following week, the entire school was talking about it. According to police, the man claimed it had all been a prank. A stupid prank. A social experiment. Something he wanted to record for the internet. Every time investigators questioned him, he repeated the same thing. It was just a joke. Most people believed that was the end of the story. Then details started leaking out. A detective later confirmed that officers found a backpack hidden inside the school. It had been concealed behind maintenance supplies in a storage area near one of the gym hallways. The backpack belonged to the suspect. What police found inside immediately changed the way people viewed the incident. There were photographs, dozens of them, pictures of students. Some had clearly been taken without their knowledge. Students walking to class, students eating lunch, students getting off buses, students standing outside after school. The backpack also contained printed class schedules, handwritten notes, maps of the school, detailed maps. Certain hallways had been marked with arrows. Several classrooms were circled in red ink. Even more disturbing were the dates written beside some of the room numbers. Police never publicly explained what those dates meant. Rumors spread through the school almost overnight. Some students claimed investigators had found names. Others claimed there were home addresses. Nobody knew what was true anymore. The administration refused to answer questions. The suspect continued insisting it had all been a prank. But nobody could explain why someone planning a harmless joke would spend weeks collecting information about students and mapping the building. A month later, my mother received a phone call from investigators. They wanted to speak with us. When we arrived, a detective placed several photographs on the table. I recognized them immediately. They were from the backpack. Then he pointed to one photograph. My photograph. Someone had taken it from across the street while I was walking home. I remember staring at it in silence. Then the detective quietly said something I'll never forget. As far as we know, he never made contact with any of the students. As far as we know. Those words still bother me. Because they weren't saying he didn't. They were saying they couldn't prove it. The suspect eventually accepted a plea deal and went to prison. To this day, he still claims it was all a prank. Maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe the backpack meant nothing. Maybe the maps, the schedules, and the photographs were all part of some stupid plan to scare people. But every time I think about that day, I remember something. Out of all the photographs investigators showed us, mine was the one sitting on top. The first photograph they pulled from the backpack. And I've never been able to convince myself that was a coincidence. I've never told this story online before because, honestly, I still don't know what to believe. This happened when I was in 8th grade. My middle school had a lockdown policy just like every other school in the district. We practiced it several times a year, and nobody ever took it seriously. Most students treated the drills as an excuse to get out of class for a few minutes. That changed on a rainy Thursday in October. I remember the weather because the sky was so dark that it looked more like evening than noon. I was sitting in science class when the intercom suddenly crackled to life. At first, nobody paid attention. Then the principal spoke. "Teachers, initiate lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill." The room instantly fell silent. Our teacher locked the door, shut off the lights, and moved us into the corner furthest from the hallway. Nobody laughed. Nobody talked. The way the principal sounded scared everyone. About 5 minutes later, we started receiving texts. The rumors spread fast. Someone had seen police cars surrounding the school. Someone else claimed there was a man with a gun. Another student said a suspect had run into the building. Nobody knew what was true. We sat there for almost 30 minutes. The silence was unbearable. Then we heard footsteps, slow footsteps. They came from the far end of the hallway and gradually got closer. The entire class froze. The footsteps stopped outside our room. I could hear someone breathing on the other side of the door. Then came 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to let us know someone was there. Nobody moved. A male voice spoke. "Open the door." The voice sounded calm, almost friendly. Our teacher immediately shook her head. The voice came again. "It's okay, I'm with the police." Nobody believed him. The door handle moved, once, twice, then stopped. For nearly a minute, there was complete silence. Eventually, the footsteps continued down the hallway. A girl sitting next to me started crying. I remember thinking that was the closest I'd ever come to being genuinely terrified. I was wrong. About an hour later, officers finally escorted us outside. The lockdown was over. Parents were already gathering in the parking lot. Students were crying, hugging each other, calling family members. Nobody seemed to know exactly what had happened. By that evening, the story was all over town. According to local rumors, a man had been spotted entering school property shortly before the lockdown. Police searched the campus but never found him. The official explanation was that he had probably fled before officers arrived. That should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, something happened that changed everything. A detective came to our house. My parents invited him inside. He asked if I would answer a few questions. I thought he wanted information about the lockdown. Instead, he pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of me. The photo had clearly been taken without my knowledge. I was standing at a bus stop near my neighborhood. The detective asked if I had ever seen the person who took it. I hadn't. Then he showed me another photo, and another, and another. Every single one was of me. Walking home, leaving school, playing basketball at the park. The oldest photograph was dated almost 4 months before the lockdown. My mother looked horrified. The detective explained that police had recently arrested a man sleeping inside an abandoned building several miles away. Inside his belongings, they found hundreds of photographs. Most of them were pictures of local students, including me. I couldn't understand why. The detective couldn't either. The man refused to answer questions. What scared me most was the final photograph. Unlike the others, this one wasn't taken outside. It showed the inside of my bedroom. My bedroom. The photograph had been taken through my window at night. I was asleep in the picture. I remember staring at it while my stomach turned. The detective noticed my reaction. Then he quietly asked me a question. "Do you usually lock your window?" I told him I did. That's when he exchanged a look with my parents. A look I'll never forget. Because it wasn't the look of someone who had solved a case. It was the look of someone who had discovered something much worse. A week later, investigators searched the man's storage unit. What they found was never released publicly, but rumors spread. Some people claimed they found maps. Others claimed they found journals. One rumor stood out. According to one of the officers involved, the man had kept detailed notes about certain students. Names, schedules, family members, daily routines. And next to some of the names were dates. Nobody knows what the dates meant. My name was on that list, with a date only 3 days after the lockdown. To this day, I don't know what was supposed to happen on that date. The suspect died in jail before he ever stood trial. He never explained why he was following those students. He never explained why he had photographs taken inside my room. And he never explained what those dates meant. I'm 26 now. I've moved to another state. I have a family of my own. But there is one thing I still do every night before going to bed. I check every door. I check every window. Then I check them again. Because sometimes I wake up remembering that photograph, the one taken while I was sleeping. And every time I think about it, I realize the same thing. The lockdown wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was learning that whoever had been outside our classroom that day already knew exactly who I was.